Welcome everybody to the meeting house, the Church on the Hill. We're going to talk today about the spirits of the Revolution. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Amy Lafave. I'm the local history librarian at the Lenox Library. I've worked at the library for over 30 years, but in this position it's been a lot shorter. My job in part is to kind of educate us on things that we might not know about the history of our town. So if you came to the Minuteman program last year, you'll know that a company marched from Lenox to Lexington. Took them about 6 or 7 days. That, if you think of today and think just about exactly 250 years ago today. So now it's in May 1776. All the battles in Massachusetts are fought. Oops, we're advancing by ourselves. That's great. It's possessed. It's got a spirit. All the battles had taken place in Massachusetts, so there were no battles left to be had in Massachusetts. George Washington, who had been stationed at Cambridge in May of 1776, was in Philadelphia with the Continental Congress. And they were in Philadelphia trying to make up their mind what to do about whether they actually should declare independence from Great Britain. They hadn't yet. At the same time in Lenox was already ahead of the game. So we talked about this with a non-importation agreement. We also, in Berkshire County, started with the Sheffield Resolves of 1773, which almost reads like the Declaration of Independence only 3 years earlier. Berkshire was the first to close the courts. We were always ahead of the game. I think it's because we were so far from Boston. It was like, what are you going to do about it? You're not going to come out to the remotest wilderness corner of the world, as our selectmen referred to Lenox back in 1772. So in this town meeting in late May, there was which was held in the meeting house. So it wouldn't be this meeting house. This church was built in 1806. The first church was built shortly after the incorporation of Lenox. They started construction in 1770, and it took 5 years. So finished in 1775, it sat about, so I'm gesturing a little south and west of the current building. That's where the first meeting house stood. And in those days, we didn't have separation of church and state. So the meeting house and the town hall were one and the same. So town meetings were held in the church. And in that meeting house, there was a series of meetings, starting with a meeting to appoint a committee. They were chosen to advise the Lenox representative to the Massachusetts General Court on instructions to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, which, as I said, was still deliberating on whether to separate from Great Britain. And I'm going to read you the wording that committee came up with to instruct their representative. And that meeting continued on June 3rd, 1776. To the representative of Lenox, these are to direct you to use your best endeavor to suppress all the tyrannical measures that have or may take place from Great Britain, and likewise take as much care that you do not set up any of a despotic power amongst ourselves. But let us have freedom at home, although we have war abroad. We do further direct you to use your utmost abilities and entrust with our assembly, and they theirs, with the Continental Congress, that if they think it safe for the colonies to declare independent of the Kingdom of Great Britain, and in you so doing, we do declare in the above-mentioned thing, we will stand by you with our lives and our fortunes. And that's signed the committee members Elias Willard, James Guthrie, and James Richards Jr. And this on the screen is a picture of part of those minutes of that meeting. Those minutes are at the town clerk's office in Lenox. The representative for that Congress was Caleb Hyde. He replaced Representative John Patterson because Patterson was a little busy. He was marching at that point. He had left Cambridge, gone to New York, and is on his way through upstate New York on his way to Canada with his regiment. Now, if you flash forward flash forward and backwards to 134 years ago, in 1892, on Decoration Day, May 30th, which today is May 30th, Memorial Day used to be called Decoration Day, and it was a fixed holiday of May 30th. There was a dedication of the Patterson Monument down in the center of town. And you can see, here's a picture taken at that dedication. There are members of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a veterans organization of Civil War vets, who marched as part of that day. And there's buntings on the buildings. The building in the back with the cupola is the first courthouse that became the old town hall and now stands on the corner of Housatonic and Church where Ombra restaurant is. That building used to stand where our present town hall stands. So Colonel John Patterson was first promoted to Brigadier General in 1777. And this picture is of the battle monument for the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey, which is now in freehold. It shows the council at Hopewell. This is one of the panels. And you have General Washington. You have General Lafayette, who is trying to make his case for proceeding with battle. You have General Patterson, who is agreeing with Lafayette. And you have General Charles Lee, who decidedly is not. And if you want to read about histories of the war, you'll find out what happens to General Charles Lee. Now, we don't have enough time to trace Patterson's complete history. That was done in a biography of Patterson, and we have in our collection a collection of books that was used for that biography. It includes this book published in 1780. So the war is still going on. It's called An Impartial History of the War in America Between Great Britain and Her Colonies. And it's published in London in 1780. And on the side you can see where it says July 4th, Declaration of Independence. The fatal day at length arrived, which, however the final consequences may be, must be deeply regretted by every true friend to the British Empire, when 13 English colonies in America declared themselves free and independent states, abjured all allegiance to the British Crown, and renounced all political connection with this country. Such are the unhappy consequences of civil contention. Now, the author of that biography is Patterson's great-grandson, Professor Egleston.
That's my grandson.
Your grandson? Wait, you're General Patterson?
No. The general was my father-in-law. I'm Azariah Egleston, Esquire, and I married the general's daughter, Hannah.
Right. I got my generations mixed up. It happens. Esquire, eh? Aren't you on the monument too? Weren't you a major?
Yes. I grew up in Sheffield. When I was 18, I enlisted as a private in the Continental Congress out of Pittsfield. Captain Noble's company, Patterson's regiment.
Pittsfield is the county seat.
What? Really? But we just built a new courthouse. Very handsome edits, right next to the coffee shop.
Oh. What is it that you're holding?
Well, this is the paymaster's book. I was promoted to paymaster from quartermaster in 1781.
Yes, you were stationed at West Point. And that paymaster's log is actually part of the library's collection. It's also been scanned and digitized and submitted to archive.org, and you can see the URL for the Internet Archive on the screen, archive.org, and you can read that flip through that page yourself.
Scan, Internet. This is all part of the same deviltry that produces those pictures.
Yes, it uses electricity. Okay. You have an impressive military record of your own. This is from the Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the Revolutionary War. Barely fits on the screen. It's reflected in the company that you keep.
Yeah, but it doesn't do justice to the privations we suffered. From the Canada campaign that was such a disaster, the Battle of the Cedars, where so many died of smallpox, to the crossing of the Delaware on Christmas Eve in the cold, cold hail.
You were wounded twice. Your grandson wrote a biographical sketch of you also. He said you were kept warm by your patriotism.
Not warm enough.
We also have in our collection a dinner invitation from February 1780.
That invitation was to dine with General Washington. It became a cherished family heirloom. If I remember correctly, we were stationed at Morristown.
And then you moved to the Patterson homestead, when the general moved to Broome County in 1790.
Hannah and I were practically newlyweds. She died too young.
Well, your grandson certainly was a patriotic fellow. He erected this headstone in the cemetery for Jonathan Parkus.
Jonathan was my brother-in-law, also from Sheffield. I like to think that the patriotism was an inherited trait. That's why I named my sons George Washington and Thomas Jefferson.
Well, thank you for your service, Major Azariah Egleston, and I'd like to give the Major a hand. Thank you. Okay. I'm not used to having props. So when we were talking about the Minutemen last year, Azariah Egleston was part of a company also in Patterson's regiment from David Noble's company out of Pittsfield. They took a little different route from our company of Charles Dibble because they left Cambridge earlier and went up with a certain ambitious Colonel, later General Benedict Arnold, in an attempt to capture Canada, and it didn't work out too well. So these Minutemen, when they were stationed in Cambridge, had the option of signing up for Continental Army service, first for 8 months, then for a year, and then for 3 years. But in the case of our Lenox soldiers, most of them fought for the militia. This is a company that marched to Fort Ticonderoga in 1775. They were credited for 5 days service and 144 miles of travel. So if you think about it, it's not like they had airplanes to fly them from Lenox to Saratoga. the Ticonderoga. They had to march out. A lot of times they would march out and the battle would be over or false alarm, but they had to be ready. That militia, and I'm glad to see we have a brigadier general in our audience who can talk more about that if she chooses, can tell you that the National Guard was first formed in 1636 at Mass Bay Colony militia. So these militia groups would become our National Guard. Now here's an example of a militiaman. This is Josiah Osborne's house on East Street. Oh, here we go again. And in the East Street book, which is a great resource, just before the Battle of Bennington, which took place in August 1777, a special call for Minutemen was made. Josiah was with the first to enlist himself and kept his musket and haversack of provisions where they could be grasped at the sound of the drum as a signal of alarm. And according to that record, he was called twice. Now, in the Soldiers and Sailors record, I could only find one instance, but he did serve 27 days at the northward. That was part of that Fort Ticonderoga morphing into Saratoga campaign, sometimes referred to the northward or the northern campaign. Now here's a pension record, a pension request, and this is for William Walker. So Judge Walker's son, the second Judge William Perrin Walker, submitted this pension request, and it describes the judge's service as a captain. He was under the command of Patterson's regiment from the Battle of Lexington to Princeton. Whether with or without a company is not known. Now, other details are kind of vague. As a matter of fact, if we went back to that Captain Divell list of men, which would have been the company that Walker should have went out with, he's not on it. So we're not necessarily sure why. Here, he is the adjutant in charge of keeping an orderly book at Fort Ticonderoga and also Cambridge. So this record, you can actually, if you go to the Fort Ticonderoga website, you can flip through and see how Walker's keeping track of the orders of the day. There's a lot of material about court martials and behavior problems, not so much about the actual battle details. Now, it is possible that the reason why we don't see Walker on that list, or we don't see two records for Josiah Osborne, I'm pulling up 3 instances of pieces of paper that we have in our collection, in the Walker collection. So Walker doesn't serve in the Continental Army all the way through, so he's a bit of a hybrid. By the end of 1777, he's back in Lenox. He's a superintendent of militia. He's part of making sure that supplies are being distributed. Like this one on the right is to make sure that there's 50 or 60 head of cattle heading where it needs to head. The first one was an order for shoes and a blanket and a shirt for both himself and for Egleston. And then we also have a clothing count, 254 shirts, 80, I think that's 84 blankets. You think I would be better at reading Walker's writing by now, but so this is another requisition order. So this is the kind of record keeping that they were able to keep during the war. I mean, there was a war going on, but keeping track of all the record keeping and who fought where, you can see how some of that would have been lost in the haze. Now here's the headstone of Colonel Elijah Northrop. On the left, you see his farm on East Street, which he sells to Asher Sedgwick. That is still standing, barely. And then on the right, you have where Northrop moved, which he also ran a tavern. And that's, I think the most common label we're giving it today currently is the Winstanley Place. So it's on Main Street next to Roach Funeral Home. Now here's the thing about Colonel Northrop. The highest rank I can find for the colonel in all these records is sergeant. So here's the muster roll for the 1777 Captain Belding's company in Colonel John Brown's regiment of militia. This list also includes Jonathan Foster, Rufus Parker, Caleb Walker, Simon Willard, and Ichabod Ford, who are all buried in the cemetery here. But I could never find anything up to the rank of colonel until I pulled this article from the newspapers.com archive. So military duty didn't stop with the end of the Revolutionary War. They continued to have their militias. There was an actual threat of war with France in the 1790s, which didn't come to fruition. And then there was actual war, again, with Great Britain in the War of 1812. So Northrop's colonel ranking comes as a colonel in that militia. And so this is an 1801 call for people to sign up at the house of Mr. Zadok Hubbard in Lenox. And guess where Zadok Hubbard's house was? Hubbard Street. Now, speaking of Captain Belding, trying to find information on Oliver Belding. And other than these certain records, like all these records, militia rolls, Belding with a G at the end does not come up. Now, this is a copy of the non-importation agreement before we had it cleaned up and preserved, by the way. And here, at the very bottom of that scrap, it says Oliver Beldin with no G. Now, that is in contrast with the 1798 assessor's record that we have in the library collection. Here's Oliver Belding's assessment. He's doing pretty well. His son, Oliver Belding, Esquire, is doing even better. But here's Belding's headstone, and his son is also buried down the row. And that headstone says Belden with an EN at the end. Now, why am I going on about this? It just shows how difficult it is to try to trace some of these fellows, because I just wanted to make sure that there weren't two separate men with such close names living in Lenox in the 1770s. So I'm pretty convinced that Belding and Belden are one and the same. And here is the 1811 obit for Captain Oliver Belden, age 78 years. Now here's an alarm, and I do apologize. I'm trying not to do too many. Here's another militia roll. Doesn't it look nice and gray? This is Captain Josiah Yale's company under Brigadier General Rossiter in 1781. So these men entered service on October 12th, left service on October 20th, credited with 12 days service, and paid 13 shillings and 4 pence for mileage of 160 miles round trip. Now, while they're marching back and forth up here, Washington is fighting Lord Cornwallis. And Cornwallis is surrendering in Yorktown at the same time this militia group was making sure the northward was defended. In this listing, Oliver Belding is a corporal. Now, I don't think Captain got demoted. I think this is the junior, our Oliver Esquire. Others on this list are Josiah Newell, Elijah Northrup, and Rufus Parker. Now, speaking of Rufus Parker, Rufus was 16 years old, and here is his service. His older brother Linus was a sharpshooter in the Battle of Bennington. After the war, Rufus, who sadly dies at the age of 36 in 1797, but before then he was a sexton for the meeting house. He and his father Titus, who lived where the Garden Gables is now, took turns being sexton for the church. Here is the Arcadian shop. This was the home of Thomas Steele. He did not fight too long. He was on the other end of that requirement from militia. Men had to, between the ages of 16 and 60, were required to report for militia duty. So Rufus reports at 16, and Thomas Steele reports at the age of 55. Now, here's a picture. I think it's from the early 1900s in our collection. And you have Desire Steele, his wife, and in the corner is the tombstone of Thomas Steele. And that's what it looks like today. So I'm glad we have this picture, because I couldn't figure out which one was for Desire and which one was for Thomas. But we've got some work to do in that cemetery, and I'm hoping by us calling attention to things that I know there are people that are aware, but just to bring that awareness to the forefront. Now, in order to come up with the map of 42 soldiers that is in our cemetery, I compared the list that I made up, that's 45 pages long, extracted from the 17-volume Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the Revolutionary War, and I contrasted that with a list that Paul Pelkey made in the 1990s, I think. Jeff, 80s, 90s? Yes, a while ago. Yes, because he has noted in this list, which is on the town website as well as ours, of who had SAR status and would have a marker. So that's Sons of the American Revolution. And so my list has a nice long record for Jonathan Foster. He's in bold on this list because in that list I bolded all the names of those men who also signed the non-importation agreement. And then you can see the little snippet from Paul's listing. And you'll see on the top, Jonathan has no marker listing at all, but 2 down below, there's a listing for Jedediah. He has an SAR 1775 marker indicated. Now here's Jedediah's record. Jedediah didn't make my list because it wasn't obvious that he was from Lenox, but he made Paul Pelkey's list. And here's Jedediah's house. It's on E Street. He has a marker because he had descendants. And his descendant, Mary Emmeline Wellington, applied for DAR status. So he is ancestor A041625 in the DAR database. She also claims Josiah Osborne is another ancestor. But as far as I can tell, nobody applied for poor Jonathan. So if you go out to the cemetery, Jedediah and Jonathan are buried next to each other. I don't know if they're related or not. I haven't been able to find a common relationship. Stands to reason. But one has a marker and one doesn't. So we're going to try to rectify that. We know we can't install SAR markers because that is an organization you have to apply for status. But we can do something to make sure that those men are honored as well. And here's one of those markers. If you can see, in the center is a model of a Minuteman. That comes from Daniel Chester's French statue that's at Lexington. Now, in 1901, there was a book published. And here's a copy of this book. It's a list of the soldiers and sailors of the Revolutionary War whose graves are designated by markers. So there was an initial project to make sure all the men were honored. And in this, it lists by town and it lists the soldiers by town. And I got excited. And then I turned to Lenox. 30 markers, names not received. Great. They didn't make the deadline. So a simple project to find 20 is up to 42 and counting. We've got 16 markers now in the cemetery. There are 4 that are missing from the Paul Pelkey list, and again, there are more that need to be marked in some fashion. I haven't even brought up the cemetery in New Lenox. There are some patriots buried there as well. I will talk about them a little more in the next program that's related to our Revolutionary War. It will be on the Patriots versus the Tories in Lenox. And there are Patriots and Tories buried side by side in New Lenox Cemetery. Tory Farm is located there, but that's where I figured we had enough to cover today with just the one cemetery, so one cemetery at a time. Another resource we have is a map done as part of a public works project from FDR time. This is a map of the cemetery with all the veterans from the Revolutionary War through World War I. We also have a list in the library compiled by Mabel and Mira Parsons, which has a Revolutionary War soldiers list in it. And then we have this in our collection. Again, that Walker Rockwell collection of papers. A grandson, Robert Rockwell, was a big local history buff. Thank goodness, because we have his notes. And he had enlisted Frank Barrett to come up with a list. Now, Frank includes his grandfather, Nathan Barrett. He was from Conway. I cannot find any record of a Nathan Barrett from Conway serving in the Revolutionary War at all. But his grandson says he did, so we'll go with that. Now, at the bottom of this list, you'll see the name of Thomas Tracy. But this one is not, he's buried in Lenox. He's not buried in the cemetery. He's buried in Hutchinson Field, which was on East Street. And here's the site of the Thomas Tracy Farm. Tracy Farm. Well, I know it's not a great picture, but it was the best I could do. Oh, well, I'm glad you identified yourself.
There's no barn. Where's the barn? The barn is where my dear Thomas died. He breathed his last. Or was it a cabin? It was a long time ago.
The barn was listed in your 1798 assessment, along with 35 acres of improved land, but no house.
They left out the 12 square feet where I buried Thomas. He died of smallpox. He came home with it from the expedition to Quebec in 1776. We had one last talk about family affairs. It was a warm, pleasant day in May.
Unlike today.
He sat in a chair, and I got as close as I could while keeping safe.
Today we call that social distancing.
Nothing social about it.
Well, your husband was one of the 9 foundation men of the first meeting house. And in 1906, there was a centennial celebration of this meeting house built in 1806. And this speaker was Frank Rockwell, Robert's brother. He said that Tracy's grave was found a few years since.
And you lost it again?
I'm afraid we did. It's all woods now. Actually, you did your part in the revolution. You were called upon to knit some stockings. You had 24 hours to complete that task.
I didn't have a bit of yarn in the house. So I went out in the field, sheared a sheep, carded, spun, doubled and twisted, and knitted those stockings on time.
Pretty impressive. Well, your husband was a true patriot. He was named to the Committee of Correspondence, and he is one of the...
Signed that pledge. What was it called? All the high and mighty ones around here natter on as if it was something important.
The non-importation agreement? Yes, your husband was a signer. It was pretty important. Those men were agreeing not to submit to servile submission to Great Britain.
Those are pretty words. What difference does it make? They expected me, a poor widow, to submit to servile submission to the tax collector. They came looking for guns during Shays' Rebellion. I gave them their gun, and then I sicked my dogs on them. They left mighty quick.
What's in your hand?
The deed to the farm. I'm moving to Shenango to live with my son, Tom.
Oh. Well, Widow Tracy, we appreciate your presence today, and I know it must feel sad that your husband is still missing in the woods, and we're hoping to find him someday. But thank you for coming and visiting us today. Thomas Tracy is not the only one who we can't find. Matthias Hall lived on the county road, which is Pittsfield Road. Here's his deed. Here's a deed from Joseph Maltby to Matthias Hall. It is published in. It was published. It is registered in 1783, but the sale went through in 1777. Because keep in mind, in 1777, the courts were still closed. So they had a lot of make-up work to do once the courts reopened. This property was south of William Martindale's property. Now, when this deed was actually recorded, Hall was dead. And Obedience, his wife, had married the neighbor, fellow soldier William Martindale. Both Matthias Hall and William Martindale were fellow soldiers in that list of Lexington men who went with Captain Dibble. Now here's a list of the officers in Harry Sherburne's regiment in 1777. Hall was a lieutenant, but you can see his name is crossed off. It says that he died August 12th. Now, in his probate record, Titus Parker was paid 6 pence to dig his grave, but we don't know where. I suspect there might be a pauper's part of the cemetery because Hall died insolvent. By 1783, Martindale was also dead. He made it a few through till 1781, and then he drops off the face of the earth entirely. Can't find a record of him dying, can't find a record of him being buried anywhere. Obedience Pixley Hull Martindale now marries Stephen Bush, and they move to Vermont. Stephen Bush also dies insolvent. So we have 3 husbands for this poor Obedience. She survives them all. They all died insolvent, and at least Obedience has a headstone in a cemetery in Vermont, so we know where she is. Now, this was a pension application for Elijah Thomas. He actually didn't live in Lenox. He served from Barnstable and then moved to Lenox. Same thing with John Tyler. He served in the Connecticut line, and his pension lists all the worldly goods, and also notes that he is a Mason, age 55, and suffers from rheumatism. So that's why he's applying for a pension. Elijah Mack was a captain in Middlefield, Connecticut before he moved here. So you see there's a pattern. In the E Street book, it mentions that he lived at what will eventually become the Delafield Farm. Mack will purchase this in 1823. It was once upon a time the James Guthrie Farm. So going back to our committee who came up with a language to tell Caleb Hyde what to tell the Congress, that's one of our signers is James Guthrie. Now, Guthrie settled in Township 9, moves to Shenango County, like Lucy Sprague, Tracy. It's part of this 212,000-acre Boston Purchase to settle this border dispute between New York and Massachusetts. I don't know if you remember from your U.S. history days, if you look at a map of the colonies, those colonial borders went from one coast to the other coast. So you'll see Massachusetts, and there's this big, long line that goes to the Pacific. Well, New York had a problem with that. So in order to settle that dispute, New York gave Massachusetts, and I'm sure I'm not getting all the details right, but you get the gist. Many of our men moved there because the price of an acre was 12 cents. And that included Shenango, Broome, and Tioga County, New York. So I said we have 42 men. When I was making the map, I had 41. I was putting the final touches on it, and I was in the cemetery with Superintendent Bill Gott, and he said, "There's a fellow walking around. He wants to talk to you about his ancestor, Jethro Butler. Where is he?" And I'm looking on my map. I don't have Jethro Butler on my map. And this man said, "Well, I'm applying for SIR status," and he recited this very record of his service, which I was able to verify. So now we have 42. Jethro Butler actually buys the 76-acre farm that was once owned by James Richards, another one of those members of the committee. So this is a list of the non-importation signers, and I just want to refresh your memory. What I did at that program is I showed how many of those folks moved away, did not stay in Lenox. So it's a similar thing now with our cemetery map. How many of the soldiers that are buried here signed that non-importation agreement? Well, here's your list. And how many of these soldiers came to Lenox after the war and so therefore weren't here to sign the document? Here's your list. So if they didn't sign, it was because they weren't here yet. But if they were here, I imagine that we would have needed another piece of paper for that document. So another one of our men who moved as part of that Boston Purchase was General Patterson. He died in Broome County in 1808. His wife survives him. She dies in 1841, and she's not buried with him. She's buried in Spencerport, New York, or they were. As part of that celebration, on May 30th in 1892, the Pattersons were disinterred from their respected cemeteries and reinterred here at the Church on the Hill Cemetery. So they were separated for over 70 years and then reunited in 1892. So I'd like to thank you for coming. I'd like to thank the Lenox Cultural Council, Jan Shaggy, who did yeoman's work on digging up muster rolls, Pat Jawan, who was looking at ledgers, and the two of them were traipsing through cemeteries. We have a lawyer in our midst who helped with deed searching. Thank you, Pam. I'd also like to give another round of applause to our spirits, Azariah Egleston and widow Tracy. Thank you. And we can open up the windows now a little bit to let some light in. Oh, and I think I see the spirit of Rufus Parker. So if you'd like to go out and say hi to Rufus, or just take a walk around the cemetery, you are certainly welcome. And I hope you've enjoyed this program. And that's all I have. Thank you.